Working? Yeah. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored to try and present today. Very much moving from the global, we have a saying, think globally, act locally. So I'm using the vineyard as a metaphor for what I call radical regeneration. So this is a radical approach. So I come from Kent and in England, and we've recently had £600 million invested in vineyards. So we have a very positive side to climate change. We can plant new crops. We're also growing olives in England, so this is positive. The negative is that they're just moving a very toxic value chain from the continent to England. And by toxic, I mean very toxic. So we now know that we've nearly lost 80% of insect biomass in Europe. This is a catastrophic change. And I think it's largely due to pesticides and sprays. So this is very toxic. So the title of the talk is The Economics of Resilient Nature-Based Solutions, looking at the UK vineyards. So how do I move that? Is it, which one is it? The side, is it the side thing? On the side, yeah. So my background, I run a company which we've been very lucky to be involved in major environmental economics linked activities. One of the most important things we're doing recently, we've just had a budget of $1 billion in Bangladesh for nature-based solutions for coastal resilience in relation to climate change, involving tree-based approaches. So this complements heavy engineering to give climate change resilience. Mangroves, agroforestry, a whole range of things. I'm also visiting professor at the University of Reading. So resilience in the English language means bounce back. The bad news on climate change and the biodiversity crisis often overwhelms individuals. It's too much. So we need to look at the energy for change in people and identify exemplars, build on the positive energy for change. That's the only way forward. The aim of this paper is to find solutions, or at least spark discussion, on climate change resilience and nature restoration in the context of vineyards. So how can we find the positives and the energy to have a revolutionary approach to regeneration? So why invest in regenerative English viticulture? Well, climate change has enabled a new opportunity by completely looking at different ways of vineyards. We can make them multifaceted. So they produce carbon investment, biodiversity net gain, technology, artificial intelligence, and housing. So the question of where do we want these vineyards and what functions could be is very, very broad, as multi-use landscapes, not just toxic monocultural plots. There's a big market for no-spray grape juice, mixed juices and wine, but not organic. Unfortunately, the organic label has lost the plot in relation to wine because they're allowed to use copper sprays. So we need to have the concept of no spray. So using regenerative economics, we can find weaknesses in the adapted value chains and look at opportunity, deconstruct the whole elements of the system to find out, where do these crazy ideas come from? And what are the factoids? Factoids are ideas that have no evidence whatsoever. Just some very assertive individual tells people this is the way we do things. and they get away with it without any evidence. Capitalize on diversity for more products and increase natural capital. Regenerate above and below ground biosystems, and regenerate the whole social aspects of the system. And then we can use bioeconomic models to optimize return on capital and the regenerative pathway. So a bioeconomic model looks through time at what the gross margins are and returns on capital, at the same time looking at the growth of the crop, or the tree in this case. Now move on. Where we used to think they were all competing for the same resources. We now know that they're in multidimensional niche space. They're not in the same environment at all. They're using different resources, and we're looking at complementarity and synergy and not competition. So all the ideas of chemical agriculture based on monoculture turn out to be irrelevant. So it's a combination of trees, crops, fungi, livestock, including fish and poultry. What's the benefits of having specific species together? Not all of them will work. You have to look at where the synergy is, which ones work best together. The key features are you can get synergy from combining them in terms of increased yield or more economic efficiency. There can be different starting points for agroforestry. You could start with the crop, like a wheat crop, and put trees in it. You can start from a woodland and grow ginseng in the woodland or whatever. Or you can start from a pasture, a plantation, or an orchard. Not only can it be more profitable, but it can be a very powerful nature-based solution, a profitable nature-based solution to protect people from adverse weather or other issues. And it's particularly relevant in the face of the bioabundance crisis, which is this lack of insect biomass. Insects are absolutely critical for, the bird populations. They're also important for pollination. So these are fundamental issues. We talk now more about bioabundance problems and biodiversity problems. So we work with farmers in England. This is one of my farmer trials. Again, another climate change opportunity. That's a standard wheat field. We then grow walnuts in the wheat field, and they grow incredibly well. And there's no effect on the wheat yield. We get a full wheat yield, and then the farmer gets extra benefit from the walnut. So the return on capital is better, the asset value is increased. And now we're exporting both hazelnut oil and walnut oil to China from England. So the world's a very different place than it used to be. Incredible opportunities for new tree crops and products. This is an example of an agroforestry system with a very high value timber and sheep. If livestock have their mean body temperature affected by +1 or -1 degrees centigrade, the live weight gain or the dairy efficiency reduces. So with having shade from trees, it has a massive economic effect on the economics of the livestock. In addition, we can reduce the vet's bills from health issues. The animals can eat tree leaves and get resilience from lots of pests. Right, so when we're looking at the vineyard, we're saying, can we diversify the income streams, improve the environmental profile by doing agroforestry? So within the vineyard, where can we do this stuff? Well, we can plant things within the alleyway between the vines. We can plant things around the edge of the vineyard to give a better microclimate. And we can get income from all of these things. And we can also grow things within the vine row and allow the vine to climb up the trees and benefit from the mycorrhizal association of trees in the row, so they can resist major diseases like powdery mildew and downy mildew. So deconstruct things, look at how it's better to do things in a mixture. What place should the vineyard be? Should it be a peri-urban area where it's providing houses as part of a food forest? Where should it be? What should it look like? So these are some images I've generated to look at what it might look like. So this is a good one. Stone pine, the most valuable nut in the world. That would be a good combination with the vineyard, and the shade of the pine could improve the quality of the wine. So you're improving the price of the wine by having pine nuts. This is a very provocative picture. So actually the vine, where does it come from? The vine actually comes from the side of a stream on the edge of a forest. So it normally would have its feet in the water, and it would also climb up the tree. So it would invariably have benefits both from what's living in the water and what's fungi or mycorrhizally associated with the tree that it climbs up with. So this is an absolutely radical, revolutionary insight and has been buried from the whole milieu. So by deconstructing and asking basic ecological questions, it's a revolutionary approach to regeneration. This was common in the Americas, the idea of the water being the substrate, the floating gardens of the Incas. We're doing lots of floating gardens in Bangladesh. Incredible economic opportunity, a nature-based solution. The Chinese are real masters about having fish and integrating fish with trees. We can learn a lot from them. So what is a grapevine? Well, it's a thing that grows next to water and climbs trees. Think about it. So, we've been, for 8,000 years, we've got off on the wrong foot. So these errors do carry on for some time. Right. These amazing animals have got the ability to provide all the fertilizer you need. They've got the ability to eat or speed up the mineralization of the leaf litter. The leaf litter is the host for the powdery mildew and the downy mildew, which is the reason why vineyards are the most toxic system in the world in terms of sprays. So we've got arable crops, you've got a certain amount of spray. Then even worse, orchards, they're terrible, sprayed every fortnight. Vineyards are even worse. They are the most toxic in terms of spray intensity. And even when we look at the data on the amount of sprays put onto crops, it's worse than that because we're using different surfactants and materials that make them far more toxic. Even with a lower volume, we were kidding ourselves. They're more toxic than they were 10 years ago to birds, insects, and everything else. Mechanization. Now we've got incredible opportunities for robotics, and we can grow the crops and space the crops to fit the mechanization. It's not rocket science, it's incredibly simple. So when we're developing these systems, we have 3 levels of analysis: economics, agroecologics, and ergonomics. Ergonomics is how to mechanize, use AI, use robotics. So this machine can go harvest the grapes and the blueberries all together. I've just finished a £14 million commission in Portugal to integrate nuts with blueberries. These are all superfoods with incredibly high value, amazing return on investment in Portugal. Look at the spacing. We can have the vines incredibly wide, and then we improve the microclimate. We're planting the vines far too close. We're creating the environment for the fungi. There's not enough airflow. It's perfect habitat for all the disease. In addition, the human eye is absolutely terrible at understanding how much light there is. So when we see a closely spaced vineyard, the eye accommodates and thinks there's enough light between the rows. There is not. There's about 40% shade when you use a measuring instrument. So the lack of UV, the reduction in UV, is also allowing the fungus to grow. All these ridiculous factoids, you know, this is the best way to do things, they're complete rubbish. There's no evidence whatsoever that this is the best way to do it. Again, you know, let's let the vines climb up the trees and have higher production. We can now use machinery to harvest at higher levels. That allows us to have wider spacing between the rows. There are lots of benefits from that support, and it might have a beneficial effect on wine quality, the taste. So we know that tannins and various sugars are affected by trees. That's vines on apple. Right, so now we move on to the financial analysis, the economic analysis. So we move on to something I call the treadmill. Why can't we be more adaptable? Because we're stuck on a treadmill we can't get off. The first step is when you get sold the ridiculous idea that it costs £36,000 a hectare to establish a vineyard. What a ridiculous notion. So if you've spent that money, you're very unlikely to lay off the sprays because you're risking such an absurd investment. So the first thing to do is to see how we can reduce the density of those, because what you're going to change is not the final yield of what you're going to get, but the precocity. So it'll take a while for the vines to fill the space, but with agroforestry, you're already getting income from the poultry or the crops. So we can do that. We have the law of final yield. So we can have at least half the density, half the establishment cost. So these are some of the strategies for the regenerative approach. And this is the most important thing, to find the energy for change, the exemplars. So the COPs look very bad, you know, and all the bad news comes out, but underneath there are people doing incredible work with renewable energy, incredible growth rates, incredible successes, but that's often overshadowed by the global bad news and a lot of ignorance, really. So find the good news. The climate is getting warmer, spring frosts are getting later and less severe. Identify profitable solutions. So like the speaker said before, you know, income and economics are not opposite to environment. We can use environment to give us wisdom, to save money and make things more profitable. The two go together. Let's use that synergy. Identify win-win-win situations. Reduce the toxic sprays, reduce diet-related disease, create jobs, hospitality, rural enterprise. Locate and build on energy for change. In my company, we use this technique called appreciative inquiry, which is a very powerful technique to locate energy for change in individuals and communities. And that's been very successful in our work on poverty reduction in India, where we raised 33,000 families above the poverty line using worms and harvesting wild silk, mainly by women doing that, building on their incredible energy. The most important thing of all, find a way of having fun. It's a happy experience, that being success. You know, young people need to have fun. Don't burden them with all the bad news. Let's have fun together. In my day as a hippie, we'd have incredible fun at a protest or a free music festival. maybe the message to stop killing the whales might not get through in the afternoon, but we've had a blooming good time putting the message across. That seems to be missing from today, having fun. Environmental activism linked with fun. I've just started a new thing in England called Earth Sonic, where we're making music from plants and the environment, and young kids can't get enough of it. We're all together making music, and it's increasing environmental activism. The music is the environmental activism. That's what we need. Build on the positive. Try to have fun. More festivals. You're going to meet some amazing people at the festival or on a demonstration. Do action and have fun. That's the most important thing. This is all the nonsense about the establishment costs. I believe by having the vines climbing the trees, changing the density, we can halve that. And this is amazing when we look at gross margins, how much we can do very quickly. Management costs, spray costs and related labour and fertiliser, that's 30% of production costs. Again, remove it, we don't need that. Labour, don't just do heavy work. Why don't we just have fun and let the machines do the heavy work? Robotics, that's going to be the future. Targeted actions, reduce fertiliser. These are all the ways you can do it through agroecology. Reduce fungicide, reduce insecticide. And since Brexit in the UK, we're now getting some very interesting incentives. So you can have a no spray payment. You can have a biodiversity crop payment. So we're moving in the right direction for incentives. What's missing, though, is law. We need greater law to stop the farmers polluting and also the water companies polluting. We do need the stick as well as the carrot. Return on capital. Well, when you look at the income from crops, fungi, and livestock, you can dramatically increase the internal rate of return or net present value. You're going to get this stuff early on. You don't have to wait. A vineyard, normally the payback year would be 10. So that's a crazy system. Why don't we have a more diverse system? Income stability. So this is data from a Kent orchard that show the ridiculous variability of the grape yield in England. It's all over the place. Look at that. So you can't rely on a system like that. So let's have more crops, in the bad time, maybe it's good for walnut or whatever. Yields, so diversity means stability. Diversity means choice. Diversity is the way forward. Diversity of opportunity for different people. So I'm doing lots of work in Kent with refugees at the moment where we're foraging together and we all eat together and we have incredible fun. So, eating together, foraging, sharing each other's ecological knowledge, that's, for me, where it's at the moment. Behavioural economics and the treadmill and the toxic advice culture. Get people off the treadmill, give them the freedom to make a choice and help them recognise toxic business models, toxic value chains, and give them the energy to work against it. So we've talked about this. Once you've paid £35,000 a hectare, it's a very brave person indeed that doesn't spray. You're worried about your investment. The problem is you've been given the wrong varieties. They're very not resilient at all. They're very spray dependent. That's part of it. So you get these toxic advice. So you find out the guy that's telling you to plant them at a certain density is running a nursery. His business is a nursery business, so he's hardly likely to say, don't bother to buy so many plants. Don't follow that Steve Newman saying that you only need half the plants, because he's got a nursery business. He's got a conflict of interest. Most of the advisors that will come around now in England for agriculture are actually selling the sprays. So there's a conflict of interest. So there's a toxic advice culture. Also, these so-called advisors, when I give them a basic test like I do to my student, they would not be at the level of even having A levels, let alone having a graduate degree. So they're not qualified either. So they've not got any ability to think outside the box. They don't have the confidence because they don't have the education to do that. So we also need to look at new metrics for regenerative systems. And I've tried to look at actor-specific metrics. Obviously, that's an old one, and equity investors looking at internal rate of return. But now let's think about the most provocative thing. Where should we have this food production? Where should we have the viticulture? Well, in England, during our development of planning, we used to have something called the green belt around every urban area. And NIMBYs, we don't need any development in the green belt. Well, that's ridiculous. Now we call it the green life jacket. So that's going to save us. That's the key to climate change resilience, the peri-urban area. We've got the market. Young people don't want to work in the countryside. There's an incredible level of urbanization. We need to address that. The peri-urban area is the future. And that's a lot of this $1 billion we just spent in Bangladesh is concerned with that peri-urban opportunity. So the best thing is to have this peri-urban area with a share of the equity and build housing there. Housing that restores nature, that doesn't go against nature. So housing, the rental yield of the land shared with the investor is part of the new regenerative model. It's not just income from the grapevines, it's income from rent. So we need to think very broadly about new business models with multiple income streams. So what I'm doing now is to have various events where we're trying to come up with a collaborative venture across Europe to look at this, regenerative viticulture, and we want people from the industry, we want people, academics, we definitely want economists on board to help us to build exemplars of amazingly useful, climate resilient wine gardens and forest villages, looking at integrating the whole lot. Moving on to policy now. What kind of policy do we need to underpin these ideas based on agroecology and regeneration? We don't want production subsidies anymore. So we've just done a review of all the support for agroforestry in Europe, subsidies, and they've had a net negative effect. They actually delay things. The most fundamental problem with subsidy for production is it suppresses innovation. It really has a very negative behavioral effect. What we do need is subsidies for what I call carbon synergy partnership. So when we set up Carbon Action Yorkshire, working with Lord Stern, it was amazing. We got the biggest coal-fired power station in Europe. How can we get them to work with Yorkshire Water, where each side tries to reduce the carbon footprint and at the same time increases profitability? That's the starting point. It's like a dating agency. You're allowed in the room. You definitely want to reduce your carbon footprint. You can come in and you can't leave the room until you've both worked out how you're both going to have a more profitable business model. These are called carbon synergy partnerships. Subsidize farmer-to-farmer collaboration and subsidize innovation. So very clear messages for instruments of policy. We're doing the wrong ones at the moment. We're just giving subsidies for inputs. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That was excellent. Riv, if you are still listening, the answer to your question is have fun at the festival. I look forward to seeing you in Welling.
Absolutely. I am still there. I thank you, Steve, for providing me fantastic answer, because the answer is in collaboration and multidisciplinarity. And this is how economists may be able to give solutions and long-term solutions. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Very
Thank you.
inspiring.
In the interest of time, one question. Gamenos?
Sorry if I take the floor once again, but also I have to leave. First, thank you so much. I mean, I think that what we said was totally complimentary. I just wanted to add that among the many advantages, maybe you forgot one, which is portfolio diversification. And I'll take it from Syria. Although it is still a little bit disputed, there is an analysis that says that the Syrian crisis, on top of all its historical and political causes, was accelerated by a 4 years unprecedented drought. But what we know is that the Syrian traditional agricultural tissue, which was mainly family farms, would have resisted this drought. Family farm opposes to income farm. In a family farm, you produce everything that the family needs, and if there is some excedence, you exchange it on the market. So by nature, it is an agroecology approach. It doesn't make you rich compared with the income farm, which is the place where you produce nothing that you directly need, but you produce what the market requests. But compared with it, it also has an advantage, which is highly valued in Wall Street, which is portfolio diversification. If on your farm you have a few goats, some olive trees, some and here that something might arrive that is harmful for wheat, but you still have your tomatoes. And what happened in Syria is that with the best intentions in the world, this tissue of family farms was encouraged to shift to large-scale production of cotton, which drinks a huge amount of water. Again, maybe through what I said before, it sounds like I'm against multinationals or big clusters. No, that's not the case. I mean, we wouldn't have some essential services with it big clustering like, I don't know, cancer treatments. You cannot develop them only with small farms. But let's keep this concentration, this monocultural concentration, which is not only in agriculture, it's also in other things, where it makes sense. But again, thank you so much for giving such a concrete demonstration of how much we need to go back to what our territories can naturally express.
All right, thank you. I'll call it a day in the interest of time, because we have people online which are joining for the next session.